Hey, this is Val Taylor. Let's make some cornbread. The French calls it mise en place, and it means having all your stuff out, having all your ingredients out, so you're not running from the refrigerator to the pantry to the stove to wherever to get stuff that you're prepared to. Basically, you're just dumping stuff. So right here, I've got a cup of. This is 1 cup of all-purpose flour. We're making some good old-fashioned cornbread, and I'm gonna put it through my little strainer, my little sieve right here. That's a cup of flour. Now, this cornbread is not sweet. I don't want you to think this cornbread is sweet, but I do use 2 tablespoons of sugar. So that's a cup of flour, cup of all-purpose flour, 2 tablespoons of sugar. It's just going to give it a really, really nice flavor. Now, in addition to that, I use baking powder. I use 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. So let's measure that out. That's 1 teaspoon. That's 2 teaspoons. And then a half a teaspoon. 1/2 teaspoon. So that's 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Okay, I also use a half a teaspoon of baking soda. Baking soda. Baking soda. All of this is going to help the cornbread rise and be pretty, okay? Now, normally I would put my salt in here and sift all of this together, but this sieve is the coarse salt that I use this coarse salt, and it's too big to go through this sieve. So what I do is I sift right here, sift everything into my bowl. And the reason you sift is because when you're dealing with flour and stuff like that, and you're making pie dough and stuff, like I can feel rocks and stuff, not really rocks, but little knots of flour in here from when I'm taking flour with my hand and putting it on my board, and some of it gets kind of rocky. So you sift to get all of that kind of stuff out of there. So now I'll add my half of teaspoon of kosher salt. So let's go through the ingredients so far. We use a cup of flour. We use 2 tablespoons of sugar. We use 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. We use a half of teaspoon of baking soda and a half a teaspoon of kosher salt. Kosher salt. And now we'll add our cup of cornmeal. Anybody's cornmeal, and your mama's, anybody that you buy is fine. I use yellow cornmeal only because I think the cornbread is just prettier with yellow cornmeal. That's why I use yellow cornmeal. So I'll measure out a cup and I'll put that in. And I'll take my little spatula and I'll just stir. And those are my dry ingredients. So I do my dry ingredients first, okay? Now I'm going to work on my wet ingredients. I have a cup and a half of buttermilk here that's been sitting out for about 15 to 20 minutes. I have 2 eggs that have been sitting at room temperature for about 20 minutes. I take the eggs and the buttermilk out at the same time. I just melted 4 tablespoons of butter. So let me show you how I do this. I take the cup with the cup and a half. This is 1 cup and a half of buttermilk, and I put the egg in one at a time. And I'll just mix it and beat it. Beat the egg gently. Beat it till you start seeing the yellow. Can you see the yellow starting to break up? And then I'll take the other egg, and I don't crack it in here. I crack it in the bowl in case I get a shell or anything in it. I crack it in here. And then I put it in here, and I do the same thing. I beat it up. Beat it up, beat it up. Now this is where you have to kind of know what you're doing. This is melted butter, so this butter is a little warm. It's not hot, but it is melted butter, and I don't want my eggs to cook in this buttermilk. So what I do is, after I get it stirred up really well, I drop a few drops of this into the milk to kind of temper the eggs, to kind of get it all at one temperature. And then I'll mix it all together. Okay, so that these eggs don't scramble. I'm not interested in scrambled eggs. I'm trying to make cornbread. And I mix all of that together. And then you just do the wet into the dry. Just like that. Okay, and then I mix it. Now the thing with cornbread is that you want to mix it thoroughly, but you don't want to beat it to death. Okay, you want to make sure it's all mixed up real well, but you're not interested in beating this to death. Okay. So I'm going to mix it to make sure it's all wet and it's all good. Take a couple of seconds. Okay? And you got to look, I want to show you this. Look at the bottom of this bowl. You see how that's dry down there? You want to make sure that that gets wet. You want to make sure that you get that mixed up because you don't want your cornbread not turning out right. Okay? So you want to give it a good scrape, and that's enough. That's enough mixing right there. Don't need to mix that anymore. Now I'll take my cast iron skillet, just a minute. And I have in my cast iron skillet, I've melted a tablespoon of butter. So this cast iron skillet is warm. It's not hot, but it's warm with melted butter in it. And I did that because I want that crust on the bottom to be real good. And then you just take it in here and you pour it in your skillet. And you let this cook 425 for 25 minutes. Check your oven, do between 20 to 25 minutes. It's 25 minutes in my oven, okay? If you were making muffins out of this, it would be 15 to 20 minutes. And you just take this, put it in your oven. Hold on a second. And you set your timer. And when I come back, I'm going to show you what it looks like. But here's the point I want to make. The cornbread is very, very simple to make. So before you start adding your cheeses and your jalapenos and your meat and all of that stuff, learn to make this basic pan of cornbread. And just remember, when you're adding meat, the meat should already be cooked. Don't add raw meat to this. So if you wanted to add ground meat, you cook your ground meat, you put it on a paper towel, let it drain, or you put it in a strainer, let it drain, let some of that oil drain off of it, let it kind of cool down a little bit, and then add it to your mixture, and then put it in the oven, okay? So I'll come back and show you how this cornbread looks. But this, if you can make this, you can feed your whole family. If you are struggling, you can feed your whole doggone family off cornbread. This is one of the breads that helped me get my kids off fast food. Hey y'all, the cornbread is out of the oven. This thing is hot, but I want y'all to see, and I can hear it sizzling at the underneath it. The reason you can tell that this cornbread is good, now if you can't tell, you take a toothpick just like you were baking a cake and stick it through the center and it should come out clean. I don't need to do that. I've been making cornbread for 40 years, but it kind of separates itself from the edges. Let me see if I can show you that. You see how it's kind of, you can see through the edges around here? It's done. And so what my boys used to do when they, because the house smells so good, y'all. The house smells so doggone good. They used to take butter. I always use unsalted butter. I'm not sure if I said that in the video. But they take butter. They would take a piece of butter. And they would come down to the kitchen and stick it on a knife. And they would do this. And they would just go all over the cornbread with butter. Just sick. And they would stand there at the stove and cut the doggone cornbread and just eat it. And when they cut it, let the rest of the butter just melt through the piece that they just cut. If you can make this cornbread, y'all, I'm telling you, your kids will not want to eat fast food. I'm also going to show you how to make some homemade syrup. So if you're on a budget and you can't buy syrup, baby, you can make your own syrup. You got a bag of sugar? Show you how to make some syrup. So that's the cornbread. I want y'all making this cornbread for the holiday season, okay? It is good eats, and if you're not ready to eat the cornbread right now, guess what? Let this cool to room temperature, cut it in half, put it in a Ziploc bag, put it in the freezer. You can still use it, okay? When you take it out for the holidays, you can cut it up in slices, or you can use it for dressing. Make your cornbread. It will keep. All right. It's so good. Look at the back of that. That's heaven. That's heaven on earth. This the bread that got my kids off fast food. Press play, press pause, do step by step, make you some cornbread.